There are mornings you don't forget, not because something beautiful happened, but because everything you thought was stable crumbled before you'd even put on socks. Mine started with the smell of burnt toast and that soft tick of the heater kicking in. It was a cold Tuesday in November, the kind that wraps your house in silence. No birds. No traffic. Just quiet. I got out of bed like I always did. Reached to her side first, without thinking. Empty. Not unusual. Sometimes she woke early to run or do yoga in the living room. Or so she said. But this time the sheets were too neat. Cold. Like no one had slept there at all. I rubbed my eyes, stretched, and walked into the kitchen. No note. No sound. Her mug was gone. The coffee pot was still full. Something felt off. You don't realize how much you rely on the small chaos of a partner's morning, shoes left out, a hair tie on the counter, until it's not there. I sat down with my own coffee and opened my laptop. The usual morning routine. Emails. News. Weather. Then, habitually, I opened my bank app. Not because I expected a surprise. Just because I always checked. We were planning to remodel the guest room. She said she wanted a home office. Said she was finally ready to take her freelance work seriously. But when the app loaded, my stomach dropped. $4.21. I blinked, refreshed. Still $4.21. I scrolled to the transaction history, and there it was. $47,830, transferred out at 3:42 a.m. to an account I didn't recognize. No joint ownership, no familiar routing number, just, gone. I sat frozen, coffee untouched, heart racing, pulse thudding in my ears like war drums. She didn't run, she vanished, and I hadn't even noticed her packing. I didn't panic, not at first. Panic comes after the disbelief dies down and the facts start stacking themselves like a wall you can't climb over. At that moment, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was a banking error. Maybe she transferred it to a savings account she forgot to tell me about. But deep down, I already knew better. No one accidentally clears out nearly 50 grand at 3:42 a.m. I checked the other accounts, my emergency savings, my investment portfolio, the business account tied to my freelance work, all untouched. Just that one joint account we used for household expenses. Rent, groceries, bills. The one we'd built together over 6 years of marriage. And now it was nearly empty, save for enough to buy a cup of gas station coffee. I picked up my phone, dialed her number. It rang twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I opened our text thread. Last message from her was from the night before. Don't forget we need more trash bags. Love you. No emojis. No tone shift. Just routine. I typed out a message anyway. Call me. Something's wrong with the account. No response. I walked into the bedroom and opened her closet. Half her things were gone. Not everything. She didn't make it obvious. A few pairs of jeans, some of the good coats, all her jewelry. Her passport, gone. The travel folder we kept in the drawer by the nightstand, gone. My chest tightened as the last of the denial melted away. She planned this. I stood there for a long moment, trying to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. Not a transactional one. Not one about bills or groceries or her needing more time for her projects. Just a conversation between two people who once promised each other forever. I couldn't remember. I checked the bathroom. Her toothbrush was gone. So was her hairdryer. But she left her face cream. The one she always complained was too expensive to replace. That was the first detail that made me angry. Not the money. Not even the silence. But that she didn't even care enough to make it clean. That she left crumbs like I wasn't even worth a good disappearance. I grabbed my laptop again and opened our shared documents folder, where we stored tax returns, invoices, all that adult paperwork stuff you build together when you're not planning to walk away in the middle of the night. The folder was there, but several files had been removed, a few renamed. One caught my eye, fwd_property.pdf. I opened it. It was a lease agreement, not ours. A rental in Denver. Her name was on it. New email, new phone number. The signature date, 3 weeks ago. I sat back in my chair, stunned. While I was making dinner and asking about her day, she was signing a lease across the country. While I was lying next to her thinking about paint colors for her future home office, she was planning an escape route. Not just from the marriage, but from me. I forwarded the file to myself, attached a screenshot of the bank transfer, and sent it all to a private email I hadn't used since college. Something told me I'd need to keep this off the grid for now. Then I did the one thing I'd never done before in our marriage. I called a lawyer. He picked up on the third ring. Gruff voice. Straight to business. You the guy who emailed about marital asset theft? That's me. He paused. You sound calm. I've had an hour to sit with it. Well, he said, let me be the first to tell you, this doesn't end how she thinks it does. I'm counting on that. I gave him everything, dates, screenshots, account info, the Denver address. He didn't flinch. Said he'd get the paperwork moving. Don't confront her yet, he warned. Let her think she's ahead. That's where people like this slip. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who just found the line he would never let anyone cross again. And my wife, she hadn't just crossed it. She danced over it. But I wasn't going to chase her. I was going to catch her. I spent the next 2 days doing what she probably assumed I wasn't capable of, digging, documenting, and watching. She thought she married a soft man, the kind who would break under silence and vanish beneath the weight of confusion. But what she forgot was, I'd spent years building things from nothing. And now, I was about to do it again, only this time, I was rebuilding me. The lawyer moved fast. Said the documentation was enough to start with an emergency asset freeze. He filed for a temporary injunction, contacted the bank with the formal complaint, and flagged the transfer as potentially fraudulent due to deceit within a marital arrangement. Cold words, but necessary. I wanted the truth to sound like law, because that's what she tried to escape. I also did my own research, pored over the lease she signed. The landlord's contact information was there, tucked into the fine print. I waited until 5 p.m. Denver time, then dialed. Hello, Sam Grayson speaking. Hi Sam, I said, keeping my tone measured. I'm doing a little background on a recent tenant, Melissa Drew. Pause. Then, she signed the lease a few weeks ago. Move-in was yesterday. Did she mention she was married? Nope, he said flatly. Came alone. Paid the deposit up front. Cash. Cash. Yeah, he added. In person. Seemed like she wanted to keep things quiet. Of course she did. I thanked him and hung up. The story was writing itself now, and every word was one she never thought I'd see. Back at home, I checked the security footage. One benefit of being a cautious man in a world that takes shortcuts, I'd installed cameras around the property 2 years ago after a car break-in down the street. Melissa rolled her eyes at them back then, said I was paranoid. But now, they were gold. Footage from 2:51 a.m. showed her walking out the front door with 2 bags. Not panicked, not rushed, calm, calculated. She stopped at the edge of the driveway and looked back, not at the house, at the camera. She knew I'd find it all eventually, and she still went through with it. I sat there for a long time staring at that frame, her face half lit by the porch light, no guilt in her eyes. Just emptiness. Like I had already been erased. I forwarded the video to my lawyer. He replied within 10 minutes. This seals it. Emotional abandonment, financial deceit, asset relocation. We'll hit her with everything. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about response. Because if she thought disappearing in the night would leave me stuck in place, she misunderstood the kind of man she married. The next step was to secure what was left. I closed out our joint credit cards, froze the household accounts, and moved every subscription, bill, and digital link to private credentials. Changed passwords. Cancelled her gym membership. Turned off her Spotify. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it was mine, and I wouldn't let her keep living like she still had access to my effort. I also cancelled the remodel we were planning. The contractor was confused. Did the timeline change? He asked. No, I said. The house did. That night, I sat on the back porch with a bottle of beer and the Denver lease open on my phone. I stared at the address for a long time, imagining her unpacking, pretending it was a fresh start. I wondered if she brought the photo albums. The ones I made by hand. Or the blanket from our wedding day, the one we both swore we'd keep forever. Probably not. Sentiment doesn't weigh much when you're running with stolen money. She hadn't just taken dollars. She'd taken belief, memory, trust, the foundations. But the structure, the man, he was still here. And now, he was building fireproof. By the 5th day, the shock had stopped rippling. I wasn't checking the door every hour expecting her to walk back in, crying, saying she made a mistake. No part of me was holding on to the idea that this was salvageable. That fantasy burned out the moment I saw her face in that security footage, blank, like she was stepping out of a hotel room and not the life we built together. The lawyer had already sent a demand letter to her new address in Denver. Certified mail, with full documentation of the funds removed, the date of her departure, and a list of legal consequences if she didn't respond within 5 business days. He told me most people crumble when the word fraud starts getting used officially. Melissa didn't. Instead, she sent a text. You always said I was free to do what I wanted. This is me doing it. I don't owe you anything. There it was. Not denial, not even a fake apology, just entitlement. And that's when I realized, this wasn't a crack in our marriage. This was a pattern. A long, slow erosion of empathy I'd mistaken for exhaustion. The missed dates, the constant deflections, the gaslighting every time I asked where the money went or why our savings never added up. I thought she was overwhelmed. I thought she just needed time. She was planning a heist. And the only reason she waited this long was because she needed me to build the pile first. I stared at that message for a long time, didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted it, forwarded it to my lawyer, then deleted her contact. If she wanted freedom, she could have it, but she was about to learn that freedom without integrity comes with a price. That afternoon, I got a call from the bank. The fraud division had completed their internal review and flagged the transfer. Since the money left our joint marital account without mutual consent, and since I filed within the window, they were placing a temporary hold on the destination account. She won't be able to access the funds until this is resolved, the rep said. Good. There's also an option to pursue recovery. I want it. And just like that, her getaway started to unravel. She may have been a ghost in my house, but now I was the shadow chasing hers. I drove to my parents' house that evening for dinner. My mother, sharp as ever, opened the door before I could even knock. You look thinner, she said. Stress diet, I replied. My father offered me a handshake that turned into a hug. They didn't press for details, they already knew enough. But over dinner, my mom reached across the table, touched my hand, and said, you didn't fail, you know. She just stopped trying. That hit harder than I expected. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that she chose to see me as disposable. After dinner, I stepped into the backyard, into the same patch of grass where Melissa and I had taken anniversary photos just 2 years earlier. I remembered her leaning into me, laughing about how awkward we looked. I thought we were making memories. She was probably thinking about her exit plan even then. I took a deep breath and let the past slip through my fingers like sand. Later that night, I got an alert from a friend in Denver. A guy I knew from grad school who happened to live just a few blocks from the address on Melissa's lease. I'd reached out to him quietly, no names, just questions. His message read, saw her today, new car, new hair, looked like she didn't have a care in the world. I stared at that sentence, and I'll be honest, my hands clenched. Because there's something about knowing the person who detonated your life is sleeping peacefully under a new roof while you're sweeping up glass. But I didn't reply, didn't vent. I just opened my notebook and wrote one line, let her feel safe. That's when the storm will hit. Because the thing about people who run with what isn't theirs, they always forget to check the weather report. And I was coming. I woke up early the next morning. No alarm. Just that kind of wired awareness that comes when your soul knows something's shifting. I stepped outside onto the porch with coffee in hand, watching steam curl upward in the cold. The sky was the color of regret, gray, stretched thin across the horizon. I didn't check my phone, didn't open my email. I already knew the next step was coming, and I wanted to be grounded when it arrived. At 9:13 a.m., it did. My lawyer called. She hired representation, he said without so much as a hello. Of course she did. Out of Denver. Yep. Some mid-tier defense firm. Their guy reached out this morning with a vague offer to resolve this amicably. I laughed under my breath. They always want peace after they've started the war. He chuckled too, but there was steel in his voice. She's nervous. That bank account hold spooked her. They'll try to offer partial repayment. Maybe even frame it as a misunderstanding. You want me to entertain it? No. I want you to let them talk first. Then we show them what we've got. I wasn't just being stubborn. I was preparing. Because while she was hiring a lawyer, I was building a timeline. Every text. Every unexplained charge. Every night she said she was working late and came home smelling like citrus and sweat. Every lie she thought I swallowed whole, I was now regurgitating with timestamps. That day, I took it a step further. I drove out to the storage unit we once shared when we moved in together. We'd kept it all this time, old furniture, boxes of her college things, some backup files from my freelance contracts. She had the only key, but I had the lease. A quick call to the facility manager got me in. When I opened the unit, it smelled like dust and old ambition. I found our wedding photo album shoved behind a crate of yoga mats. I almost left it. Almost. But something made me crack it open. And there, tucked behind the last page, folded into the sleeve meant for an extra print, was a slip of paper. A plane ticket. One way. Denver. Dated for a month before she left. She planned this for a while. And the kicker. It wasn't in her name. It was in the name Melanie Drew. A slight variation. Still her, just not legally. But enough to throw someone off if they weren't looking closely. I snapped a picture, sent it to my lawyer. He called me back 5 minutes later. That's identity obfuscation, he said. It'll work in your favor. I slid the album back into the crate, this time more like evidence than memory. As I drove home, the anger began to fade, not because I was healing, but because there was simply no room left for it. Anger is fuel when you're lost, but when the path is finally clear, you don't need rage. You need resolve. When I got back, I started drafting a statement. Not for court, not for her, for myself. A document of truth, a personal reckoning. I loved a version of you that never existed. You were a story I told myself to sleep at night. You were comfort sewn from red flags I pretended were ribbons. But the moment you chose escape over honesty, you didn't just leave me, you freed me. And I'll never let someone rent space in my soul again, unless they plan to pay in loyalty. I printed it, folded it, slipped it in my wallet where our wedding photo used to be. Later that night, I got an email from her lawyer. Subject, preliminary discussion of terms. They were offering 20% back. No apology, no statement of guilt, just numbers on a screen with a line that read, "Our client hopes to move forward peacefully." I didn't even forward it to my attorney. I responded myself. Peace is earned. She's already spent it. Then I clicked send, and smiled, because she was finally starting to learn something I already knew. You can vanish in the dark, but sooner or later, the daylight finds you. There's a calm that comes once you've passed the point of emotional reaction, when everything sharp has already cut, and all that's left is clean, open space. That's where I lived now. Not angry, not bitter, just focused, sharp in a way she'd never seen me before. The next step was court. My lawyer had filed for an emergency hearing. The motion was aggressive, but legal. We were requesting full financial review and an official freeze on her access to any jointly accrued marital assets, past or present. She had 72 hours to respond with verified documentation or risk default. I spent that day gathering the rest of the evidence, emails she sent while pretending to work, photos from our shared drive she forgot were synced, receipts that showed she'd been spending money at boutiques and spas in Denver before she even walked out the door. All of it went into a single folder on a flash drive labeled Clarity. At night, I found myself back in the gym. It wasn't planned, just instinct. Something about putting weight on your back and lifting it up over and over forces your mind into rhythm. Pain becomes a pattern. And when it's physical, it stops being emotional. I just finished my third set when I saw a familiar face by the water station, an old friend of mine from college. Derek. We hadn't seen each other in years. David, he said, towel slung over his shoulder. I nodded. Derek. He walked over. Man, you look intense. I shrugged. It's been that kind of year. We caught up between sets. I gave him the broad strokes. Marriage ended, she took the money, ran off to Denver. I kept the details light. I wasn't there to spill. Just needed to hear my own story in someone else's ears. He listened without flinching. Then he said something that stuck. You know, my cousin went through something like that. His wife emptied their account, disappeared for months. He chased her through lawyers and therapy, trying to understand why. But in the end, the why didn't matter. What mattered was who he became after. That line hit deeper than the weights ever could. Who I became after. Because she thought she was walking away from a man she knew inside and out. The reliable husband. The guy who folded towels her way and paid the bills early and asked before making weekend plans. She thought I'd crumble quietly and stay there. But grief makes a man dangerous, especially when he's got nothing left to prove. That night, I stopped by the bank in person. I wanted copies of the freeze orders, in writing. Call it overkill, but something told me her lawyer might try to stall. The manager handed me a folder. You're doing the right thing, she said softly. We see this kind of thing more than we'd like to admit. You ever see someone come back from it? She gave a thin smile. The smart ones don't go back at all. I drove home with that folder sitting in the passenger seat like a passenger of its own. Like the version of me that used to sleep beside her, now reduced to paper and proof. I pulled into the driveway and saw a package on the porch. No return address. Just my name. I opened it right there. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the watch I'd given Melissa on our 4th anniversary. Custom engraved on the inside, "Time never outgrows love." And beside it, a note. I thought about keeping it, but it doesn't belong on my wrist anymore. No signature. Didn't need one. She was trying to walk it back. Maybe not fully. Maybe not publicly. But that watch wasn't about sentiment. It was about guilt. About putting a bow on a betrayal. I walked inside, dropped the note in the trash, and set the watch on the counter. Then I opened a drawer, pulled out a sticky note, and wrote, "Time didn't outgrow love. You outgrew truth." I stuck it inside the watch's box and taped it shut. In the morning, I'd mail it back. Not because I owed her closure, but because I wanted her to know. I didn't wear reminders. I buried them. And I only keep what stays. The hearing was set for Friday at 11 a.m. Neutral courtroom. Neutral judge. But there was nothing neutral about the evidence. The folder I carried in looked like any other Manila case file, but inside, it held the truth that Melissa had spent months trying to bury. My lawyer, Sharp, as I'd started calling him because the man didn't just prepare, he sharpened, met me at the courthouse steps. Dressed in a charcoal suit, briefcase in one hand, calm fury in his expression. "She's here," he said. "Got in 15 minutes ago." I nodded once. I didn't ask if Jordan was with her. I didn't care. We entered the courtroom like soldiers walking into familiar terrain. I didn't even look her way. I knew she'd be watching me, waiting to see if I'd flinch. But there was nothing left to flinch at. You can't hurt a man who's already seen the fire and walked through it without burning. Judge Warner was the type who didn't entertain theatrics. Mid-60s, stone-faced, known for ruling fast and without emotional detours. As soon as he read through the initial documents, I saw his brow lift slightly. That was the first crack in the otherwise stoic mask. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Drew," he said, looking over his glasses. "Would you care to explain why nearly $50,000 were removed from a shared marital account at 3:42 in the morning, without your husband's knowledge or consent?" Melissa stood slowly. She was dressed down, earth tones, hair in a low bun, the look of someone trying to project humility. "Your Honor," she began, "there were circumstances in our marriage that made me feel unsafe. I believed it was best to remove myself, and the funds I had a right to, as part of that exit." "Unsafe how?" he asked flatly. She hesitated. Emotionally, I felt trapped. Sharp stood. "Objection to vague generalizations. No documented evidence of emotional distress or abuse has been submitted." The judge nodded. "Sustained." Then to her, "If you wish to build a case on emotional hardship, Ms. Drew, I'll need more than feelings. Let's stick to facts." She glanced at her attorney, who leaned in and whispered something. Then she said, "I moved the funds to secure a new home and start fresh. I believed it was my share of the marital assets." Sharp rose again. "We have documentation showing that the defendant opened a separate account under a variant of her legal name weeks prior to the transfer. Additionally, we have receipts of her spending thousands at luxury retailers and spas in Denver, before the date of her departure." He walked forward and placed the flash drive on the judge's bench like a dagger. "This isn't about safety, Your Honor. This was premeditated financial deceit." Melissa's shoulders drew tight, but she said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward me. I didn't blink. Judge Warner took a long pause. Then, "Temporary hold remains in place. Full audit of all marital assets ordered. If fraud is proven, restitution will be required. Ms. Drew, you are not entitled to declare war and then cry peace once the papers are filed." It was over in under 20 minutes. Afterward, in the hallway, her lawyer tried to approach mine. Sharp didn't even slow down. "We'll talk when she's ready to tell the truth," he said. I kept walking. But then, from behind me, "David." I stopped, didn't turn. "Can we just talk?" she asked. "No lawyers. Just you and me." I slowly turned to face her. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, spiritually. She'd gambled everything and lost control of the pot. "I gave you 1,000 nights to talk," I said. "You chose silence and escape. That door doesn't open anymore." "I didn't think you'd fight me like this," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd steal from me and disappear in the dark," I replied. "But here we are." She didn't speak after that, just watched as I walked away. That night, I pulled out the notebook again. Wrote one sentence. "When a person shows you who they are, believe it, but don't just walk away. Build something better where they dropped the match." I closed the cover, and slept better than I had in months. I didn't see her after the hearing. And I didn't need to. Melissa retreated into the only thing left to her, damage control. Her lawyer started sending more frequent emails, each one offering a slightly larger percentage of the money she'd stolen, now cloaked in words like settlement, reconciliation, and mutual resolution. They still hadn't figured it out. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the line. The one she crossed when she decided my trust was disposable. When she decided my effort, my nights, my loyalty, could be cashed in like a pawn ticket. My lawyer, Sharp, laid it out for me over lunch in his downtown office. She's stalling, he said, tapping the screen. What she's hoping is that you'll accept a partial deal just to move on. She thinks you're tired. I am tired, I admitted. But not weak. He grinned. Good. Because the judge just approved a formal forensic review of her financials. Bank statements, credit lines, cash withdrawals, the works. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. Let's make sure every dime she took gets exposed. You sure you're ready for all that might come with it? I'm counting on it. By that weekend, I'd moved fully into a rhythm that didn't include her. The house was sold. The check had cleared. The keys were already handed off to a newlywed couple who thought the fireplace had good energy. I wished them luck, told them to repaint the bedroom. I wasn't nostalgic. I was done. But the past has a way of knocking even after the locks are changed. It came in the form of a letter. Handwritten. No return address, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was hers. I almost didn't open it. But I did. David, I know you probably hate me. I wouldn't blame you if you did. What I did was cruel, and there's not a day that passes where I don't hear your silence louder than any words you ever spoke. I've told myself 1,000 stories to sleep at night. That I did it for a fresh start. That we grew apart. That you'd be better off without me. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of being ordinary. Afraid that my life was set and I'd never matter beyond our kitchen, our couch, our quiet routines. You gave me peace. And I mistook it for boredom. You gave me loyalty. And I mistook it for stagnation. You gave me love. And I mistook it for a cage. That's not your fault. That's mine. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I needed you to know, it wasn't about you. It was about the version of me I couldn't live with. And when I saw how easily you stood tall in that courtroom, how composed you were while I crumbled inside, I realized. You weren't the small life I ran from. You were the only real part of it. Melissa. I folded the letter slowly. Didn't rip it. Didn't cry. Just stared at the words like they were graffiti on a wall I'd already repainted. Because that's the part no one talks about. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from revenge. It comes from realizing the person who hurt you finally saw the truth, long after it could save them. I slipped the letter into a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a record. A document. Then I got up, grabbed my jacket, and walked 2 blocks to the bookstore. Claire was working the register. Red sweater, hair up again, smile that didn't ask questions. Back already? She asked. I nodded. Told you I liked the quiet here. She tilted her head. You staying long? I thought for a moment. Yeah, I said. I think I am. She didn't say anything else. Just slid a cup of coffee across the counter and pointed to the back table. Yours, she said. And for the first time in a long time, I sat down without waiting for something to fall apart. Because nothing broken was chasing me anymore. And nothing missing could pull me backward. Final hearings feel less like war and more like paperwork. Cold rooms. Formal voices. Legal terms stacked one on top of the other until they don't sound like real language anymore. But what cuts through all of that? The truth, once it's said plainly. Melissa showed up. Alone this time. No lawyer at her side, just a stack of forms and a defeated look she couldn't dress her way out of. She didn't meet my eyes as we entered. And I didn't try to find hers. The judge reviewed the audit results first. I already knew what was in them. Over $68,000 spent in the 6 months before she vanished. Designer stores. A 3-week rental in Tulum. Jewelry. Spa weekends. Flights under different variations of her name. I watched the numbers scroll like crime scene evidence. Her lawyer had withdrawn the week before. Irreconcilable client conduct, the official term. I didn't ask. I didn't care. Melissa stood when called. The judge didn't raise his voice. Didn't lecture. Just laid it out like bricks. Miss Drew, this court finds your actions to be in violation of multiple aspects of fiduciary duty and marital trust. You initiated financial separation without communication, authorization, or documentation. The damage inflicted, both material and emotional, was deliberate. Therefore, full restitution is ordered. She didn't respond. just nodded. I almost didn't recognize her. He continued, "You will return $47,830 in full, within 120 days. You will forfeit all claims to remaining joint assets, including retirement savings, and you waive any rights to alimony or future support." It was quiet when he finished. The kind of quiet that settles when even justice feels heavy. And just like that, it was over. No fireworks. No dramatic final plea. Just the sound of a gavel and my lawyer packing up files like he'd just finished another Tuesday. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. That in-between chill that says winter is close but hasn't quite arrived. She followed me out. "David," she called softly. I stopped, turned. She stepped closer, arms wrapped around herself like a shield. "I'm not going to ask you to understand. I know I don't deserve that." I didn't speak, just waited. "But I wanted to say it face to face anyway," she continued. "You were always better than me. And I think that's what scared me the most." I gave her a long look. Not cruel. Not cold. Just finished. "No," I said. "I wasn't better. I was consistent. You confused stability with weakness. You mistook commitment for control. You thought the man who stayed would be the man who'd never fight back." She blinked fast, like that hit harder than she thought it would. "I wasn't perfect," I added. "But I was real. You can't say the same." She nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. "I hope you figure out who you are," I said. "Just don't do it while dragging someone else through the fire." And then I walked away. This time, I didn't look back. That evening, I returned home to the apartment that now held less memory and more meaning. I dropped my keys in the bowl, took off my jacket, and opened a window to let the breeze in. Then I pulled out the notebook. I flipped past the scars, past the rage, past the chapters she helped write. And on a blank page, I began something new. You survived. Not because she came back. Not because you won in court. You survived because you stopped waiting for someone else to decide your value. You chose yourself. And from that choice, everything new will grow. I closed the notebook. Later, I walked to the bookstore. Claire was there, wiping down the counter. She saw me and smiled, not the curious kind, but the kind that says "I see you, and I'm glad you came back." "You ready to read something happy?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, smiling. "Or maybe I'll write it." She slid a chair out for me. "Then let's start now." So I did. Not with her. Not with the past. But with me. Because the man who woke up to an empty bed and an empty account, he wasn't empty anymore. A year later, I barely recognized the man I used to be. Not because he was weak, but because he hadn't yet learned what it meant to be whole without permission. Back then, I defined myself through shared routines, muted arguments, and dreams bent to fit someone else's version of freedom. I thought love meant endurance. Turns out, love starts with honesty, and it stays with mutuality. Melissa gave me neither. But she gave me something else. A clean slate. I never sent her another message. Never replied to the final bank transfer notification, which came through 2 weeks before the court deadline. $47,830, paid in full. No note attached. Just silence, like she knew she couldn't afford more words. The money went into a new account. Not just financially, but symbolically. A fresh ledger. The kind where the only transactions were honest effort and earned peace. Claire and I never rushed. We didn't need to. She had her rhythm, I had mine. Some nights we sat in silence, reading. Other nights we shared wine and music, both of us comfortable with the simplicity we never had to explain. One afternoon, I told her everything. Not all at once, but piece by piece. She listened the way people listen when they have nothing to prove. And when I finished, she just reached across the table and said, "I'm glad you made it out." That was all. No pity. No questions. Just presence. The notebook is almost full now. Pages lined with the story of a man who walked through betrayal and came out not bitter, but defined. A man who stopped chasing what left and started honoring what stayed. The last entry I wrote was simple. You can survive the fire, but the real miracle is learning how to walk again, without dragging the ashes behind you. I used to think closure came from confrontation, from hearing, "I'm sorry," or watching the person who hurt you fall apart. But that's not closure. That's ego looking for applause. Closure is when you no longer measure your healing by someone else's damage. It's when you realize the wound doesn't define you, how you carry it does. So, when the anniversary of that morning came, the morning I woke up and she was gone, I didn't light a candle. I didn't pour a drink or reread the court papers. I didn't check her socials or replay the security footage. I just woke up, made coffee, opened the window. and let the light in. Claire stirred beside me, half asleep, hair wild, skin warmed by the rising sun. I kissed her forehead, stood, and grabbed my shoes. Going for a run? She mumbled. Just around the block, I said. I want to see what the world feels like today. Don't forget eggs, she murmured. I smiled. I won't. And just like that, I stepped outside into a morning that no longer belonged to pain. A morning I reclaimed, not by forgetting what happened, but by deciding what comes next. Because she may have vanished, but I finally showed up.